Wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Good morning. It's time to get back to work here at the Aztek Dummy Labs, and we are going to be working on Enterprise from Discovery this week. But before we do that, I need to take care of a little housekeeping because having spent the weekend on it, I'm still working on this Klingon base. Now, eagle-eyed viewer out there, and you know who you are, corrected me on something because I had these guys in the wrong place. I had the black on the bottom and the green on the top, when it should be the black on the top and the green on the bottom. All of his race are black on the top, Mr. Spock. Are you blind? And so I had to, obviously, since I couldn't pull these up, I just had to repaint them the opposite colors. So thank you for pointing that out. The problem with it was that they were both identical pieces and I just slotted them in the wrong spot. But once I had the decal in front of me, you could see obviously if they were wrong. So we're working on this, and I am still trying to fix the balance issue. And the balance issue is two things. Yes, this pole is too wimpy. It is too thin, but also it is too far back. The center of gravity of the Klingon ship is not where the post in the ship is. Let me illustrate. Okay, I am back. Here is the kit. Here is the finished ship. There is the hole. When you try to stick something in that hole and balance it, well, the whole thing goes down like this. It's just heavy. The midpoint should be further forward. The balance point, the center of gravity, should be further forward. But that would mean either drilling a new hole, which I have absolutely zero interest in, or making a wider base, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make, I've got some wood that is glued up here. I am gluing some pieces of hardwood together because I think that'll give me a more stable shape. I was thinking of doing it in the MDF, but that, you know, MDF, if you put a screw into it more than once, sometimes it'll strip out. So what I'm thinking is a shape, something like this, cut out of that wood that I will rest the whole ship on. Now see, I can hold this in my hand provided that the base of my hand is wide enough, and it'll take the weight and balance and all that kind of stuff. So what I'm thinking of doing is making a shape like this out of wood, putting it on the top of, you can't see that because it is, hold on, you can't see that because it's off camera, but a shape of wood like this that that I can set the ship down on, and I'll put, you know, felt on the top of it obviously to keep it protected. But that will allow me to to rest the ship down on that post and take away the need for that secondary post out at the front, and also make it easier for transport if I want to pick it up, because it will not be anchored to this. It'll simply be resting on top of a cradle of sorts. And I'm thinking I want to, on this cradle, I also want to put a peg that sticks up that will key into the existing hole, just to keep the thing from sliding around, you know, casually, because it's going to be felt and it should be level. But, you know, I just want to have some way to lock it in just to keep it in the right position. So we're going to be doing that first of all this morning before we start into, or first of all this week, before we start into Enterprise full-time. So just a programming note, you can plan your video viewing accordingly. Alrighty then, working on the base still. I've got the new top on it, the little cradle, and you can see the actual ship is actually kicking back a bit. So luckily I've got this adjustment built in. All I need to do is raise that pin and that'll set it down. And then what I want to do is pack Epoxy Sculpt around the back of it and let that dry, and that will give it the final cradle shape, and then I put felt over top of all of that. So now that I've moved the center of gravity forward, you can see here's where it used to be, and there it is. That's where it is now, and it's not having any trouble sitting square-er. Alrighty, we're back out here in the dining room, and because I needed a big space to put this down on, and there we go. Everything is nicely centered, and no ugly acrylic rod in the front. Now all I need to do is take the ship off of this, obviously, but I'm going to pack some epoxy sculpt up in here, and then of course this gets painted the same jade color as the underside of the ship. The top of it gets a piece of black felt on it. It's a shame we don't have any green felt. I might have some of that gray thin foam that I may want to put on the top of that. That might be better. Who knows? We'll figure that out together. But that poking the post up there that far, which also, you know, helps lock it in. It is that post right there. It is also the height of the, or the depth. It is the height of the depth of the hole. If you could parse that sentence. This is the height of the depth of the hole that's drilled. And I still get to do this with it, which is nice. I still get to spin it around. There's the old metal top. I need to cut off that pin at that height and glue it, and then we will be into finishes. Okay, here you see the finished, well, not finished, but this is what the top of the base looks like, the attachment. This is the epoxy sculpt that is going to be curing all night, and I'll come back and sand that down and we'll paint it tomorrow. But it fits like so on the base. The ship fits like so, and I'm going to try to line this up. Fits like so on the cradle. Line those 2 points up, and you get a nice square Klingon sitting on a base that I could still rotate. So there you go. And here you can see the shape of the, this is the epoxy sculpt, and what I did basically was take a piece of wax paper between, or put that on the bottom of the ship, sat the ship onto this bead of epoxy sculpt, and let the weight kind of settle it down to where it filled in all the gaps. And I just got that little bit of a bulge there that I can shave down once it has set up, and I can tool it a little bit. And then there's a little ding right there that I need to fill in. But this is good to go now. I'm going to let that rest, and I can finish it up tomorrow. And now we can get on to Enterprise, which, as I said, is a potato chip model. All air, very little plastic. I was playing with the parts over the weekend, and I've discovered the only main problem that's going to stop us from lighting this thing, and it has to be worked out, and that is the potato peelers. The potato peeler pylons. I've got to find a way to, since it is one piece front and back, that's it. I've got to find a way to run wiring down the edge of that. And we will be in the same boat as we were in with the Shenzhou as far as having to camouflage magnet wire. Unfortunately, if you look at the engine, take a look at this nacelle. I mean, there's plenty of room to light this. This is much superior than either of the Discovery or Shenzhou nacelles as far as being able to light them, because it's round. It's not a flat triangle like the other ones were. It's going to be getting everything down to a single set of wires. You know, if you really wanted to splurge, you would do red bulb, blue, and maybe a white bulb out the back. It may be more effective to do a red bulb up here, a white bulb in this whole area, and then tint the clear inserts blue, and not try to run a blue bulb. That will get you down to 2 bulbs, and if you can join those wires together inside here before they come down to the secondary hull, then you only have to run one set of wires out the potato peelers. So we're going to have to figure out if that's going to be the best way to go, and if so, how practical is that? Okay, the first preliminary work, well, all preliminary work would come first. That's why they call it preliminary. Sometimes I realize I'm saying these things as they're coming out of my mouth. The preliminary work I'm doing on the Enterprise. It's so fun to see this tiny, tiny, tiny Enterprise after having built the thing. I mean, really. One thing that they recommend to do, and I'm going to go ahead and do it, is for some reason they have raised this detail here. There's raised detail for the pennant and for the belly markings, and they also have the decals here for the pennants and the belly markings, and they are well, they're not showing up red on camera, but they're red. And they recommend sanding. Go ahead and sand these areas flat so that when you put the decals over top of them, they won't, you won't have a hard time. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to start clearing out some areas and test fitting things and seeing where we can channel out for wires. Hello and welcome back. It is Tuesday morning, and we are starting to lay out the lighting plan for the tiny Enterprise. And it's looking pretty good so far. We've got an orange bulb up front here and a blue bulb in the center, and I think I'm going to put a white bulb back here to shine out the back of that. And I'm wondering if painting this insert blue, if I let the white light take care of the back of it, actually use the light spill as a positive, and put the blue up front there, put a white right about there, let the white handle some of the blue back here, and then handle the light coming out here. Now this piece here is going to require a gigundous amount of light blocking. Well, helps if I'm in camera. A gigundous amount of light blocking because it's a big old clear piece. And it's only got a decal covering the top of it, which is not going to be nearly enough. So the question is, can I get these three bulbs condensed together so that I'm only running one set of wires out and down the potato peelers here? See, it has to come out that way, and I am trying to figure out the best method. Do I run it down, and I may have already said this, I'm sorry if I have repeating myself. Do I run it down the leading edge here? Do I try to bury it inside there? Or do I run it down the back? Or do I run it down the outside? Which is going to be less visible in the long run. Now, the thing is, the pylons for both sides are not identical. This one has the tabs going into the body in the front. This one has the tabs that go in the body in the back. So when they fit inside the kit, it looks something like that. So it's not as simple as channeling it down the back of this and the front of that, because they're still going to run into each other. So I got to figure out the best way for those wires not to get crossed over themselves. And I'm wondering if running it down the outside of both sides, or what's going to be the least visible. If I did it like the classic Enterprise was wired and just run it down the outside of the pylon, and then on this side run it down the outside of the pylon, so it's on the port side of both pylons. I don't think that's going to work. I think whatever I decide to do, it needs to be symmetrical. It needs to be in the same place on both pylons so that it looks more intentional. So that's what I'm trying to think of. And like I said, the first thing to do is to make sure I can boil all this down to a single set of wires coming out of each nacelle. Alrighty, work is also continuing on the cradle for the D7, And what I've done this morning is I've sanded it and put a coat of primer on it. And what I'm going to do now is spray a coat of the jade satin on it to match the underside of the the D7. I almost called it a bird of prey. Shame on me, the D7. I'm going to spray this so that it blends in, and then yeah, we'll see how that looks. I'm still open to the idea of painting the whole thing black, but I want to try it out on the hull color and see how that works. And obviously I'm going to felt the top of this with black, but we're going to see. We're going to see and then we'll know. Not having seen, can't know. Once we see, then we'll know. Seeing is knowing. Alrighty, there you go. It's the final bit of stand. This is painted ship color on the bottom, black felt on the top. Let me put this back on the post. Come on. There you go. Back on the post. Here's the locating pin that goes in the old hole. Here's the new center of gravity. And when you, and I'm going to try to do this with one hand, when you put this on the stand, now it is protected because the felt is against the ship. But I can now rotate it on its stand and it sits nice and level. So great. Let's put this back in the display room and call it a done thing. Okay, I'm about ready to call it a day because the only thing I hate more than soldering is micro soldering. And what I've had to do, and I don't know why, it's probably a simple solution to it, but I am functionally illiterate when it comes to electronics, so I only do the things I know work and don't try everything under the sun. I was trying to gang up multiple LEDs on the same resistor, and I don't know why, but it was not working. Whether the particular LEDs or what. So what I've had to back up and do is to shorten the lengths of wire, put the resistor back on each individual SM LED, and now, since thankfully there's enough room in this cavity to do it, I am going to have to gang all three connections here. So try to get this in camera. That's the white light for the back. This is the orange light for the front. This is the blue light for the middle. I'm going to have to gang all of these together and feed them into that wire that is going down. This is one thing I got done today that I was happy about. I got the wire fed down through the opening in the potato peeler. And by going it down that inside edge, I think I have camouflaged that wire about as expertly as one could expect. So it's just going down the inside edge of that opening. And coming out there and coming out there. So that's what I've got to do, but it is painfully fiddly work, and it takes all of my nimble fingers, which are not nimble anymore, and my concentration, which these days is almost a shot. So it takes a lot longer now than it probably would have 5-10 years ago. So I'm going to take a break. Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday, and look how far I've gotten. It's been a bit of a trick. This dealing with these tiny wires is not my favorite thing in the world to do. But as you can tell, I'll turn the overhead light. I've got orange at the front, blue in the center, and white out the back. I'm happy with that. Now, you know, in a more perfect world, this blue would be a little bit more even, but I'm willing to live with it. Somehow I got both halves of the nacelle together. All I got to do now is throw some glue at it and squeeze them together nice and tight. Get it in camera. Glue it together and squeeze it nice and tight. And we will have wiring coming down to the inside of this. Pretty neat, pretty neat. I'm working up on the painting masks for it now because we are going to need to block all of these before we paint. I did paint a a light blocking coat on the inside. It was not all that successful, so we may have to double up on the outside painting. We'll see how much we need. I mean, look at that. You can see how much white spill is coming out of that. And then of course we got this clear part on the end that is really going to need a lot of light blocking. So let's continue to squeeze these engines together. It's like working on a ship in a bottle inside a thimble under a squirrel. It is very tight quarters to work with, and my mind is just getting mental cramps in it from going from big expense models where you have lots of room inside to work to these tiny little things. But you work with what you got. Okay, I believe I've got both of the nacelles sorted out, so I have moved my efforts to the saucer. And I'm trying to see how few bulbs I can get away, how I can get away with using. Because there is, I mean, while there is a good amount of room, it's not, you know, limitless. And I'm thinking that if I can do this without having to do all of that shortening and splicing and all of that kind of nonsense, then I will be happier and saner when the whole thing is done. So I'm thinking, you know, one bulb pointing up and possibly the same bulb doing the bottom, but then a red bulb back here obviously for the impulse engines. So it's going to be a question of how to suspend that and then sufficiently light blocking around it. Now, it's not going to be a case of, you know, bright light. It's going to be a case of, hey, there's some light there. So it's not obviously not going to be a spotlight. And we're actually got an issue with having to frost that because it's a little too clear. So even though I know there are decals that go down on top of that, at least I am pretty sure there are decals that go down on top of that. Let me, yes, it looks very much like number 72 goes on top of that. So we will be having something to cover it, but I think I still want to scuff it up from the inside to diffuse the bulb a little bit, and then I need to paint some light blocking in here where I don't want the light to be. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, it was a long time getting here, but I've got it not closed up, but at least wired together both halves of the secondary hull. I still have to chase wires down through for the saucer, so I can't close up the front of this. But that's where I'm at, and I wanted to document it just in case it all goes horribly, horribly wrong. So what I've got here is I've got the two red lights in the back for the saucer. I've been letting the light blocking and the tulip dry, but now it's time to get back to it. I've been working on making the painting masks for it, and I've got one here, as you can tell, over the blue. And I've gone through the first round, and now I know what needs to be larger, what needs to be smaller, so I can cut the version 2. Okay, getting ready to light the top lights on the saucer. I've done the bottom ones. Basically, I just put a bulb behind a piece of white card and glued it down in place. And I'm getting ready to do the same thing here, although I've got a little bit more room, a little bit bigger window, so a little bit of fiber fill. I love this stuff. Shove it in there. Oh, I've got some, you see the black there, that is the dried tulip that is light blocking between windows. So you put a chunk of this on here, and I need to put the camera down, but because I'm trying to do this all with one hand. But basically you glue that in place, and voila, you get, now the camera's blowing out the light, but there is a definite separation between all of those windows. You do see a light block. If I get in there, no, you can't. It still looks like it's too big. But there is a light block between the main dome there and the front window. So let me glue this in place, and then we'll be ready to put this all together, I think. Okay, I can see plenty of light leaks around the impulse engines that he dealt with, but by and large, that's very good work. Very good work on that saucer. Yeah, that all of that red needs a big hefty touching up, but let's get this saucer glued together, and then who knows, we can probably attach it to the secondary hull and gather all that wiring down into the tube and close up the entire ship. Wouldn't that be fun? Good morning, ladies and germs. It is Thursday. Going to get a lot done today, I can almost assure you. Took some time this morning to paint up some light blocking extra coats on the areas that were evident yesterday that needed it. But here you can see the completed Starship on a stick. All done. Now there are 3 tiny pieces that I have not put on. The intercoolers, them which go right in here, and I have not put on the I have not glued down the domes. I think I will hold those off whilst I paint. And the deflector dish, I have not put that on. I'll do that after all the decaling is done. But what I'm working on now is getting the masking completed so that I can paint this with a good primer coat, which will not only light block it more, but unify it and show me any seams that might need to be taken care of. And then, having learned my lesson from the Tiny Shinzu, I am going to paint this a light gray color. Not white, obviously, not the metallic gunmetal that I used on the Shinzu. Looking at the decals, which are printed on the lovely blue paper this time, thank you, Jamie. I'm looking at that gray, and I want to make sure that that gray shows up. So whatever color I paint, it's going to be lighter than that. So that's it. I'm looking at my stocks of Tamiyas and see what color of gray I have available. And oh, the other thing I need to do today is get these wires down to 2 and get that into get these wires down to 2 and get them into a base. A base sort of like what I made for the Shinzu. I'll be using this, but also probably the other flea collar can that I used, like I used on the Shinzu. So enough of this yapping, let's get to building. Now, is it just me, or is there something just inherently beautiful about the sight of a freshly painted, almost white Enterprise? Yes, you can quibble about the minor structural details, about the potato peeler pylons, about the backward swept pylons, about the nacelles having that third little fin on the bottom. But to me, this says Enterprise. It's got a saucer, it's got 2 nacelles, it's got a secondary hull. Is the neck too short? Maybe. It's an Enterprise, and there's nothing prettier than a freshly painted Enterprise. Now, this is a little bit lighter than it's going to end up being. I'm going to do a light gray over top of it, but to me it was easier to start light and then add a little darkness to it than it would be to go too dark and then have to bring it up with a lighter coat. But it's definitely something that I feel the decals will stand out from. And it's shown up some seams that I need to do a little bit of sanding on. It's also pointed out some structural details that weren't readily apparent in the silvery gray plastic. But, you know, you look at it like that. That says Enterprise. There's no mistaking that for any other ship in the fleet. Love it, love it, love it. So we're going to let this dry for a bit. And then we are going to put probably just a light coat of gray over it. Oh, I'm going to sand it. I'm going to sand some seams first. Light coat of gray over it. And then a gloss so that I can put the start putting the decals down. And then we'll attach it to the base and be done. But it's coming along very nicely, and I think that's a good place to stop and go get some lunch. Okay, I've enjoyed this clean white, or close to white, Enterprise long enough. I need to darken it down a little bit so that the decals will look more natural on it than they would on this bright colored ship. So I've taken about half and half of the color I had here and mixed it with sky gray. I want to make sure, and this is where my thinking is. I want to make sure that whatever I put on there is lighter than that. Oops, see, I zoomed right past it. Than that color right there. You see the white dot? The one just up and to the right from that, or down and to the left, either one. That is the color of gray that I want to make sure I am lighter than that. Not quite white, not white, but not that dark. Okay, I don't know how well the subtleties are showing up on camera, but you can see it's a little bit darker. I've gone back and put some white highlights back in, or lighter highlights back in. And this is all base. This is all going to be existing underneath the wallpaper. So all it has to do is give me a good foundation. It doesn't have to be the be-all and end-all of color. So we're going to let this dry. And then the last thing we're going to do, well, perhaps the last thing. It depends on how much more day ends up after that. But I need to put a gloss coat on this. Let this dry for an hour or so, and then I need to gloss coat it so that I can get ready to start putting up the wallpaper. Okay, here's a setback I don't understand. Tamiya's, no problem. I painted with them for years. I've also used the Krylon gloss as a top coat, well, as a undercoat for decals for years. Today, for some reason that I don't understand, it's done this. I mean, look what it's done to my ship. That is the gloss. That is the gloss covering over top of the gray Tamiyas that I've used. I shook up the can very well. It's not an empty can. It's not down to the dregs. But it's done this horrible texture thing to the underlying paint. And now I'm going to have to paint the gray on top of this again. And this time, I'm going to try something else. I'm going to try using this gloss varnish, because maybe it's the enamel or the whatever's in the Krylon clear is reacting to the water-based paints underneath it. But dang, that's not good. Don't believe I've had this problem before, but I certainly need to correct it before I put the decals on. Okay, the initial problem was easily remedied. I just went over it with another light coat of the gray, or the gray, light coat of the light gray, and I'll let that dry. But this time I'm going to cover it with the gloss varnish, the Vallejo acrylic gloss varnish, rather than the Krylon spray gloss that I've been using forever. All I really need to do is get a glossy surface long enough to put the decals on, and then I'll flat coat right over top of it again. Then chances are I'll not run the risk, and I'll use the Vallejo matte varnish to go over the top of it. I don't know if I want to risk putting the Krylon flat over it, but I might try it on a small part just to see how well it reacts. But man, that put me back at least a half an afternoon. So back to letting this dry again. Okay, I'm getting ready to put down the first decal, and I'm going to start with a big old one right in the front. And this is my concern. And this is why I've always used Krylon gloss coat to put under decals. The gloss varnish that I put down is it's acrylic, so water based. If I put the decal on and it's too wet, is that going to mess up? And it's also water. Is that going to loosen up the clear coat that I've just put down? Is it going to interfere with what I've just done? Is it going to screw up the decal? So that's why I've always tried to not put an acrylic gloss right before I get ready to put down decals. So we're going to try it, and if I'm going to mess it up, I'm going to mess it up with the one right in the front. So here we go. Wish me luck. Okay, the first one's down. It didn't seem to have much of a problem with the underlying gloss coat. But I gotta tell you, I think I picked the right color this time. All that detail is showing up beautifully. And the light will shine out through that white part of that decal just fine, I believe. But yeah, that's gonna look just right. Not losing any of that detail in the color of the ship. Yay! See, I do learn eventually. Well, that's looking pretty. Now, these decals are going on like a dream. You know my love-hate relationship with Round 2's decals. But these ones are actually going down. They're sinking into the spots where they need to be sinking. The problem I've had with other ones in the past is sometimes the indentations in the kit don't match the details in the decal. If you try to get the decal centered just right, something ends up going off kilter. But these seem to be great all the way around. And they are laying down over top of phaser banks like they should. They're going into the depressions like they should. And that's all I'm going to press my luck with for tonight. Okay, I realize that decals can be like potato chips sometimes. You just want to put one more down and you can't stop at just one. So you just want to go to the next one and the next one and the next one. But there is method to this madness. I wanted to get the top part done. Now the cells I have not touched yet, but I do have the top of the secondary hull now and the top of the saucer done. Outside of, obviously, the name and the pennants. That comes last. But all this stuff can be drying overnight, and we will come back and hit it first thing mañana. Good morning, kids. It is Friday. It is the final, the ultimate work day of the week, and I am looking forward to getting this ship finished today. I did a little bit more last night, and then I cheated and got an early. I didn't cheat. It's my own time. Damn it. And I got an early start this morning, so I got the bottom of the saucer all wallpapered, and that's drying, and I'm starting on the nacelles and the side of the body, and they're going together nicely for the most part. I will spot one thing, or a couple things that I have found that I would improve were I to have the ear of the nice people at Round 2 for a moment. One thing I've noticed is that there seems to be in all of these diagrams a missing diagram. There is nothing that shows the inboard side of any of the nacelles. Now, it's true that they mention, from the top view, these ones that wrap around, but there's nothing really that shows you straight in from this view what goes in there, and I'm sure there are at least a couple, because number 60, well, I'll take these for example, number 61. These 61s, they're not listed anywhere here, but I know from looking at the 62s that they must go on top of that. But there's no diagram for that. So that would be handy to have a, just like one of these views, you would have just the inboard of the nacelle. And the second thing I've noticed is that the decals that are meant to wrap around the nacelles here, and now let me check the instructions to make sure I'm not doing something stupid and it's my own darn fault, but I don't think it is. I don't think that nope, it's these guys. It's the intercoolers on the top of the nacelles. They there's no cutout for them on these wraparound, on the decals that wrap around. I'll show you the example that I've got. The decal here that wraps down the edge here needs to have a cutout for the intercooler so that it can go on both sides of it, and it does not. So be advised that you are need to slice out a tiny rectangle of that decal so that you can wrap it around both sides. But like I said, some of these things are drying in real nice. I've tried to make sure that they went into the geographic locations that they are supposed to, like that is sinking down into that depression, that is popping up over the phaser banks just nicely, getting a little bit of overlap in some of them, but that's not horrible. Let's see, spying a little bit of overlap here. That's not horrible. The depressions in here, it seems to be sinking down into those nicely. Wrapping around the potato peeler is always going to be a tough thing, and I am looking forward to, once these have all dried, to slicing off some of this film that is, carrier film that is not wrapping around the edges like it's supposed to. So some of that will have to be cut out after everything is nice and dry, and for that all you need is a very, 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 very sharp X-Acto blade. But I'm to the point now where I need to let this second generation of, or second round of decals dry, and then we'll come back to it in a little tiny bit. Okay, we've got a good morning's work in. It's time to let this all bake in. I'm stepping on top of myself with wet decals, so it's time to let everything settle down. I've got a few bits left to go, but mostly it's behaving itself. Now like I said, I've had to trim out for the intercoolers there on those long decals that go down the sides here, and I've got two more, one for this side and one for that side, that I'm also going to need to, that would be these guys here, that I'm going to need to cut a slit in. And then we're down to the tinies and the markings and some stuff like that. So we should have no problem getting this thing finished today. But we'll see when we shall see. Alrighty, I'm back from lunch, and I think I'm done with everything except the markings. I'm going to put the big old marking on there and let it dry for a bit before I finish up. And then the last thing will be to put a flat coat over the whole thing. So yeah, I don't think we'll have a problem finishing up today. Okay, all of the decals are down. They're down. They've been fighting me a little bit, but they're down, and I am going to let this dry for as long as possible today before, because I have a set time that I like to finish up on Fridays, so that I can get the videos put together and edited and uploaded and all of that. So I do have a cutoff time on this on Fridays, but I'm going to let this go to as late as possible, just to do the last bit, which is to, well, I can do some work on painting the base now while this is drying, but I need to wire in the battery, and the switch is already wired. All I got to do is clip it in, but I've got to wire solder that loose wire to the bundle that's under there, and I also need to glue this down to the base, or epoxy it down to the base. So I can't do one until I do the other. But I'm going to let this sit for as long as possible, and then dull coat it. But the markings are on. You can see that. Looks very good up there. And then I'll have a few thoughts after we're done. Okay, I've got a coat of paint on the base. Not glued down yet, or not. Touched the domes with some clear orange. Let that, I mean, I was happy with the light, but when the lights aren't on, it's kind of dead there. So it doesn't hurt to put some orange on it anyway, just to give you a little goose of color there. And we're going to let this sit. And there she is, ladies and gentlemen. The finished Enterprise. Flat coated, put on a base, given a switch, and ready to take the place with the other kits. There you go. Orange Bussards, blue down the center, white in the back, red impulse engines. Now the only big disappointment is that this light here is not coming out as bright as it did before the decals went down. It is buried. Sorry, let's get it in camera. It's buried. But it's there. You can see it. It's just not as bright as I would wish it to be. But there you go. It's unmistakably Enterprise. A little bit of a facelift, but there's no mistaking that beauty for any other ship in the fleet. And speaking of ships in the fleet, I'm going to put it up next to the other ships that I have built. Let me see, this would be the Shenzhou going back here. Technically, you should put the Discovery in the center since it is their show. Discovery with Enterprise and Shenzhou. Ta-da! And that's going to bring to an end the 1 week Tiny Enterprise build. Ain't she sweet? Ain't she sweet? And that also brings an end to the trio of kits from Discovery, brought out by round 2. It's a mixed bag. You know my feelings on wallpaper decals. I think in a very large way of thinking, wallpaper decals are a cheat because you don't get to paint things. You have to take the colors that they give you. Unfortunately, for the amount of surface detail, over detail in the Discovery universe, there's no reliable way to do that other than using their wallpaper decals, because there's just an insane amount of the paint job, for lack of a better term, the Aztecing and the pinstriping and all that kind of stuff, which is, to my eye, way overdone. It's way over designed. But that's what HD television demands, apparently. You have to have something busy all the time. And that brings me to a point I wanted to make about the Enterprise. The inherent beauty of the shape of one saucer and two nacelles and a secondary hull. The decals laid down on this very well, and I think exactly for that reason. There wasn't a lot of unnecessary surface detail for the decals to lay over top of, unlike Shenzhou. Shenzhou is probably the most egregious example of an over-designed ship I have ever seen. And John Eves, I love you like a brother. I wish I knew you when we were kids. But these are way overbuilt. They're way over-designed for what they are. And here's the other thing. Now, I bought all of these because I remember Jamie saying, hey, you know, if you support the smaller kits, the larger kits, you know, it becomes more real once we see what the market for the smaller kits is. So yeah, that's the ulterior motive. Hoping for larger versions of these, because to me, larger kits are better. Yes, there are some people that quibble about, you know, having shelf space. But you can do more with a larger kit. You can wire them better. You can paint them yourself. There's just a whole big reason why I want larger kits. And what kills me is that this artificial dependence on, or artificial allegiance to a scale number. These are all 2500th scale, which to me means absolutely nothing. I'm a big fan of what they used to call box scale. Box scale means as big as it needs to be to fit in the box. It was good enough for the old 537 refit, good enough for their light. Damn it, it's good enough for these. Make a bigger box. Make the saucers at least the size of the Kelvin. I mean, here's my hard and fast rule about spaceship models. No part of a spaceship model should be so small that it is also the front and the back of the piece. If you can't put two pieces together to make it, it's too small. That was my problem way back on the original Enterprise D, which, you know, what scale was that? Who cares? It was a nice, the saucer was this big. It was a nice, it was a nice model. But going up to the nacelles was one piece, so you had to channel out for wires. Back in the day, you didn't have magnet wires that you could have just, you know, tacked on the surface. I never liked that then. I don't like this now. And every single one of these kits has had that problem. I would say, ironically, except for the Discovery. You didn't have to run the wiring outside. You came close to it in some places, but you never had to. You had to with the Shenzhou and with the Enterprise, because the pylons on the Enterprise were one piece instead of a front and a back. I'm getting off of my tangent because I want to say we deserve bigger ships than this. We deserve the fact that they are all in scale to each other. That's the important thing. If you want to make your display of ships from Discovery, yes, they should all be in scale to each other. But that scale shouldn't be dependent on 2500. I know that 350 is a very popular scale. I know 1000 is a very popular scale. If this is 2500, then 1000 would be what, twice and a half bigger, which would be about right. Make them 1000 scale to start with, and then larger if you want to. It doesn't have to be a 350. It could be a 500. I'm not a stickler for scale. I'm more concerned that they all relate to each other at the same proportionate size to each other than I do some arbitrary 2500 that they pulled out of midair. That's my take on it. Of course, I'm always going to love the Enterprise. I'm always going to love this shape, this ship, and it is probably, like I say, the best of the three, because it's just beautiful. And I'm not going to take any crap for that. So, round two, if you're listening, you've come out with these. Please give us larger versions of these. The decals got better and better with each ship. The metallic decals were wonderful, and the metallic decals they used on the Discovery particularly, but once you spray it with a clear coat, that all goes away, so I don't know what that gives you. And you are going to have to spray a clear coat over these things. So like I say, I don't know what that gets you by having that metallic, although they did print, they looked awfully nice on the sheet. Yes, they finally got around to doing the decals on blue paper, which meant you could see the white windows. Beautiful. Thank you for finally doing that. The fit on the Shenzhou decals was probably the worst of the three as far as overlapping and settling down into all the nooks and the crannies, and then overlapping with carrier film. Carrier film over the end of it. And that, I think, can be laid at the feet of how complicated this design is, or how overdone this design is. So they either could have cut the decals into smaller bits to fit inside each one instead of asking it to wrap over all of that, over all the bumps and ridges and all of that, maybe cutting the decals into smaller pieces. Just as a build guide for you out there, you guys might want to decide if you're doing this to cut the decals into smaller pieces so that you don't have that problem. Finally, getting the right color on the Enterprise was the best thing. Now, that was one thing I did on the Shenzhou that was my bad, that I'll take full blame for, was I painted it too darkly, or painted it too dark, and therefore a lot of the detail in the decals is lost. So were I to build another one, I would paint it lighter so I wouldn't have that problem. Let's see. The details on the decals got better as far as lining up with the contours of the kit parts. That was probably best on Enterprise than it was of the three. I know I'm kind of backing up and making this a review of all three kits, but they are so closely related that I think it's appropriate. I think the fact that these engines are so long gave them pause about making the kit so big, because proportionately the engines would be, you know, way out to here. But I say go ahead and do that anyway. Bigger is better to me. So that's it for the round 2 Enterprise from Discovery. And in fact, all 3 of these Discovery ships, I look forward to round 2. Looking forward to the day when they announce they're going to be making more of these, or larger versions of these. Frankly, you know, I've seen Christmas ornaments bigger than this. So until next week, when I don't know exactly what I'm going to be building yet. I have an idea, but the idea that I've got in mind, I don't have all the materials here I need for it. So until next week, when we build something new, you be good to each other, and we'll see you here next time.